Hello, my name is Fraser Ratchford, and I'm with Canada Health Infoway, and I'd like to welcome you to this talk on change management. Canada Health Infoway is sponsoring the Imagination Outcomes Challenge. You can learn more about it at our website, but as part of the challenge, we are fostering a community of innovators, and we have sponsored this series of talks to assist clinicians and staff in increasing the use and spread of innovative e-health solutions. Cassie Fraser, our change management expert here at Infoway, is going to lead the talk today. So without further ado, here is Cassie.
Thank you very much for that warm introduction. I'd like to welcome everybody to the call. At today's session, we're going to be talking about managing change in information communication technologies for health and talking about how to apply the National Change Management Framework. So specifically, during this presentation, we'll be focusing on what is change and why is it so hard. We'll be defining and characterizing the value of change management, focusing in on the National Change Management Framework, and then talking about how we can embed change management into our regular practices and what available resources are in existence for you from Infoway, and then doing a quick summary. So getting started then, what is change and why is change so hard? Well, if you look up a number of definitions for it, change can be defined as the act or instance of making or becoming different. There's a number of synonyms, such as an alteration, a shift, a variation, but if you're a change resistor, perhaps you see it as a mutation. Regardless of how you define change, it really is the act of becoming something different. And for those of you who tend to feel uncomfortable or get apprehensive when change comes your way, that's actually a normal response. We know that there's physiological studies out there that show that change does affect your brain. If you think about the number of routine tasks that we complete each day over and over again, it would be fair to say that these tasks are hardwired into our brain. We don't have to give them much conscious thought. We're comfortable with the way we do things. But when something new comes along, we're jerked out of our comfort zone, and the part of our brain that's responsible for insight and impulse control starts firing like crazy. In turn, this signals our flight or fight responses from our amygdala, and we start to experience feelings like pain, anxiety, fear, depression, sadness, fatigue, or anger. Any of that sound familiar? Well, it's no wonder then that sometimes our logic and our common sense are not enough to convince someone of a need to support the next change that you may propose. It's always something important to keep in mind. And in fact, in the world that we live in today, our experience shows us that we live in a very process-oriented, project management-focused kind of world. There's emphasis on the cost, quality, and time of everything that we do, with less focus given to the large iceberg hidden underneath the water, as shown in this picture. That is, we have less time and energy spent on considering influence, power, politics, perceptions, and belief. And we all know that these things are very critical to enabling any kind of transformational change. We typically focus on operational aspects. 85% of our time is spent on 15% of the change. That's the cost, time, and budget. And 15% of our time only is spent on 85% of the change. And this data comes to us from a McKinsey report from 2002. The result of this is that 70% of information communication technology projects fail, either to meet their objectives, to come in on budget, or within schedule or within scope. And additionally, within any kind of transformational change, we have to remember that it's not just about the end result, that it's about getting the people to change the way they do things along the way. So like this photo, it isn't just about IV pumps or pressure monitors or cables. There's actually a patient in that bed. And so just like a change in your organization is about the people who work there and who need to do things differently. Your organization may choose to adopt a new process like electronic documentation or e-referrals or e-scheduling, but it's actually Sally or Bob who need to come to work every day and agree to do things differently and learn and be supported to do things differently. So, speaking about all of this, what is change management then? Change management is just a strategic and systematic approach that supports people and their organizations in the successful transition and adoption of electronic health solutions. The outcomes of effective e-health change management activities include solution adoption by our users and the realization of benefits. This is a consensus definition for change management that's specific to the e-health world, and it was proposed by a group of change management leaders working from across the country in the health IT space and who have been sharing best practices and ideas since November 2009. And I'll come back to this group in a minute. If for those of you who like more pictorial representations, here on this slide is a graphical view of how an organization needs to focus on the people as well as the organizational change elements in an iterative fashion. Change is not a one-step process. You need to revisit pieces of the change and continually improve as you go on. And in order to get change that sticks, change doesn't stop when a project stops. The focus in supporting people and the organizational change must continue if you're going to achieve successful outcomes. So what's the cost of not doing change management? If you don't put any effort into this, what are the consequences that may befall you? Well, we know from the research that less than 20% of transformational change projects, regardless if they're in the health world or in the information technology world, less than 20% of these transformational projects achieve their full objectives. The norm tends to be over budget, over schedule, and with a lack of benefits realization. And here's some data that you may find interesting. 56% of our change projects are behind schedule, 37% are over budget, 84% don't hit their targets, and 7% fail to achieve the scope or functionality. What does that mean? Increased expense, whether you have to replan or push out timelines, add more resources, and you have a failure to achieve benefits. On the other hand, if you have effective change management in place, you can get a good ROI. There is studies, again from McKinsey, that show a positive ROI, return on investment. And it's actually about 43 cents on every dollar when you have an excellent change management in place and part of your initiative from the beginning. And you can lose up to 65% on the dollar or only a 35% ROI when you have a poor change management or no program at all. So what does that actually mean in terms of spending? Well, a study by AMR Research, who's a firm where their analysts focus on independent leading-edge research, bridging the gap between business and technology solutions, they found that companies that have successful software implementations spend about 10 to 15% of their project budget on change management or implementation activities. I don't know how many of you are able to even look at the way your projects are structured and your deliverables and come up with a budget of how much you're putting towards your change activities. But it's an interesting exercise to go through and something I would challenge you on. What do some change management deliverables look like? Well, just to give you an example, here's a reimbursement schedule, and this is just a fictitious example of some project milestones. And the ones that are highlighted there, such as the current state workflow, a governance plan, a communications plan, BE, adoption tracking, training and education, those are all deliverables that could be in support of change management activities and that you could reimburse for. And again, just to add more support for this correlation, ProSci, who's an international research firm focused on change management analysis, again in all spectrums of work in manufacturing, not just in healthcare, they have data from 2007, 2009, and now 2011 benchmarking studies that show that the percent of projects performing at or above expectations correlate with the effectiveness of your change management approach. The graph on the screen here is from 2009 data set, but it represents the achievement of project objectives. And similar statistics and graphs are available for those if I put up a project schedule or a correlation to project budget. And in fact, you can see here that when you have an excellent change management program in place, you're 6 times as likely to achieve your objectives than teams who have poor approaches for change. So I want to spend a little bit of time now talking to you about the Pan-Canadian Change Management Network, as this will frame the next section of the discussion. So as mentioned earlier, the network is a grassroots collaborative of change management practitioners who came together from across the country and are supported by Canada Health Infoway's clinical adoption team. And they got together back in 2009 with a common interest to share their experiences and identify common goals that address ongoing change management issues and concerns within the e-health space. And rather than individually trying to tackle these issues and challenges, collectively wanted to work together and see if we could find some standardized approaches to help sustain momentum. So this group is structured in terms of a broader network that has people at all different levels, from executives and leaders to people working at regional level projects, provincial or territorial projects, or even at a more local organizational level. Within the network, we have working groups, and I'll be speaking to you a little bit about those. But last year, one of the working groups got together and produced a framework and toolkit for managing e-health change, people and processes. This framework and toolkit is available on our website in both a PDF and a flipbook fashion, but it comprises our pan-Canadian insights and expertise and is based upon a current state analysis of change management methodologies, activities, and approaches that were ongoing across the country as of the fall of 2010. So the members had really asked themselves, I know what I'm doing, what are you doing in your jurisdiction? It also included a literature review of best practices and formal change management approaches, both internationally and nationally, and within the health space as well as other sectors. And it also worked to develop a glossary of terms, so trying to ensure some common understanding of what do you mean if you say business process redesign or workflow analysis. So this, within those activities, and the guide was published, the group developed the National Change Management Framework. And this is based on the information and perspectives then garnered through those activities, and basically says that there's 6 core elements you need to focus on for delivering successfully any kind of transformational change. And these elements that we'll be focusing on next include governance and leadership, stakeholder engagement, workflow analysis and integration, communications, training and education, and lastly, monitoring and evaluation. So the next couple of slides we'll be reviewing each of these elements in a bit more detail to help give you some idea of how they may pertain to your project. So when we think about governance and leadership, we're really talking about the mechanisms that are used to guide, steer, or regulate the course of a project. It includes how stakeholders can affect your priorities and progress, and as well as the change management activities that you undertake within the life of a project. There's different levels of governance, and regardless of its strategic, operational, or executive level governance, it needs to answer 3 questions. What decisions must be made? Who should make these decisions? And how are they made and monitored? However you are organized, it's important that you and those on your team are able to answer these questions. When we think about leadership, it is different from governance. So governance are the structures that you have in place to ensure the right conversations and decisions are being made. But when we think about leadership, we're talking about accountability and the people that are sponsoring and speaking up for the belief in the project. Having clearly defined leadership and accountability structures at the outset of your project will motivate others to adopt change. Successful change management requires that a variety of organizational and other governance structures and roles are in place to provide this leadership and accountability for information communication technology projects. Every project needs to have the right strategic, operational, and tactical level leadership and direction to achieve the required balance of decision making, change progress, and project success. And the graphic on this slide highlights the various leadership roles that can help to support a project effort from conception through to delivery and use. For example, you need to identify an initiating sponsor. This is typically the executive who has launched the idea. They usually remain committed to the project, but they're likely more removed from the daily leadership and accountability. You also need to have a sustaining sponsor. This could be a program, it could be a project steering committee, or it could be a group of local leaders who are accountable for successfully implementing the change. And finally, you need to have a target sponsor. This is more the local level leader of the change, interacting with the front lines. The actions of the leader vary by the role, but they can be the same person in a smaller organization, just wearing different hats. So when you think about who does change management, the next couple of slides are intended to broaden our thinking about who does change management. This slide here is taken from ProSci, but it shows that there's a change management resource and team, and that's likely the obvious answer for many of you, but it also is your executives and your senior managers. It's your middle managers, it's your supervisors, it's the other members of the project team, whether it's privacy and security, the architects, standards, it's your project support functions. Every gear plays a specific role based on how they are related to organizational change. And I would challenge you that different people or a few people in different roles, we all have a role in change management. So the next element in the framework is stakeholder engagement. And really at this, we're talking about the process by which perceptions, issues, and expectations of stakeholders are learned and managed. It includes focused attention on the individuals that are expected to change, so bringing back in that people perspective. And stakeholder behaviors and needs must be defined, understood, and considered at all stages of the project lifecycle and beyond. So a general process for engaging stakeholders would be first to identify who your stakeholders are. And I'll show you in a minute a tool that you can use to lay out comprehensively all the people who may be touched by your project, impacted by your project, or who can influence the success of your project. It's then important to segment these people into common groups in terms of their perceptions, their beliefs, or their needs, understanding what and analyzing what those needs are, and prioritizing them in terms of the effort and focus that you need to give them. And that prioritization and the analysis is going to change at different stages of the project lifecycle. So it's an important activity to come back and do repeatedly. So again, gaining a common understanding then across the team and agreeance on who the stakeholders are and what their needs are, and then incorporating that information into the rest of your planning cycle, whether it's training and education, analyzing workflow, or communication needs. The slide I have here comes to us as a tool from Manitoba eHealth, and they have a general template for identifying stakeholder categories. So they've chosen to use sponsors, key influencers, leaders, end users, resources, beneficiaries, and influencers. And they've given some examples of who that may be. It's a great template to get you thinking about and listing all the people that may be affected by your project. Other jurisdictions like to think about primary, secondary, or tertiary audiences. Some think about clinical groups versus government groups. It doesn't really matter how you break out your stakeholders, as long as it's a comprehensive list and you're able to touch all of those that may be impacted by your project. And that part should be extensive and comprehensive, but it shouldn't be overwhelming for you because while the list may be quite long, you definitely do not need to spend the same level of energy or focus on each one of those groups. There is a continuum of stakeholder engagement. So some of them you may just be informing. It could be simple communications out. Some you may consult. Some may be your change champions who are able you can empower to get out there and speak on your behalf. Again, coming to us on this next slide here from Manitoba eHealth is a graphical tool that they use at a number of their project meetings throughout the project lifecycle to map out the level of influence that a stakeholder may have on their project and how they are impacted by their project. And then they use the color coding there to talk about what level of effort do they need to incorporate these stakeholders into their planning. And they use this as a common point of discussion within their project meetings, and it just helps to keep everything on the radar and get consensus amongst the team. Looking at the third element of the framework is communication. So communications, as we know, it's the process of providing stakeholders with what they need to know. And in this case, we're doing it because we want to prompt the appropriate response and action. We have targeted approaches, and these approaches should be defined in response to our stakeholder identification and analysis. So everything you do is connected. They're not siloed approaches or thinking activities. You want to use variety and be consistent. So print, visual, verbal, nonverbal, electronic, and of course social media has now crept into the forefront. This little cartoon here, "Have a nice day at school, Jeffrey. Remember to stay on message," is a cute little graphic, but it just highlights the point that you need to be consistent. As a team, you need to understand what your key messages are, and while you may tailor them to the audience so that they are recognizable and understandable by different groups, the core messages need to be the same. So consistent and repeated communication about your strategy, about your project, and the desired end goals and objectives is vital. Without it, information will not reach those who need to know. The value of what you're trying to achieve may not be recognized, and stakeholders would not be aware or engaged in the process. Innovation and creative ideas can't be shared, and the required education and training cannot be successfully delivered. The ability to deliver the right message by the right person through the right channel to the right audience at the right time, that's a lot of rights, but it's important to get it right. Targeted approaches to communication, as we mentioned, are defined in response to stakeholder analysis. Change leaders and implementers need to understand their respective roles in communicating with a broad range of stakeholders. And the communication planning, as we said, builds upon the stakeholder analysis and the change management planning exercises to identify what your key messages for your specific stakeholder groups need to be and the various ways to deliver these messages. If possible, you'd like to work with a communication specialist to help you refine these messages and clearly communicate the plan. And lastly, you want to assign responsibility for providing the information. Don't just assume that somebody has taken that over. Looking on at the fourth element, workflow analysis and integration. In some areas of our country, this is called fit analysis. Some people call it gap analysis, and yet others call it business process redesign. Our Pan-Canadian network agreed that we're talking about the same thing. The process of understanding how things are currently done, understanding where the opportunities for improvement are, and then seeing how technology can support and improve those processes. So we want to ensure that we have a fit with the technology and the way that people are working clinically, administratively, so that these are sustainable changes that are embedded into your organizational culture. When you actually gather people together, and as noted here, your stakeholder analysis process is helpful in identifying who should be involved in this stage. But when you get this group of people together and you start talking about what happens with a piece of information as it moves through the system, as an example, that can serve as a good petri dish for other aspects of change management. It can help you identify potential early wins, some of that low-hanging fruit that you want to get to communicate successes. It can help you to identify roadblocks to implementation that you need to start creating mitigation plans for. It can help you to identify potential champions or those resistors and opportunities to communicate potential benefits. This next slide here shows again another kind of gear image here, just saying that there's a need to consider and ensure alignment of all perspectives, clinical, business, and technical, in order to achieve end-user adoption and benefits realization. Without considering the ways that people work and how business is conducted, it's not possible to incorporate a new tool or practice, causes disruption in the workplace, and potentially duplicates effort. If people are unable to easily use the technology or fail to see its value, it won't get used, and you'll be wasting valuable resources and halting progress. This is particularly important if your organization is buying an off-the-shelf project, or even if you're designing an entirely new solution. You need to know where your gaps are. So the objective of workflow analysis and integration is to embed these new processes using electronic health solutions into the operations of your organization. As noted, analyzing and integrating workflow processes prior to implementing these technologies stimulates that critical analysis on how work is performed, the ways in which the improvement can take place, and identifying further opportunities that can be enhanced by new technology. It identifies the critical junctures for feeding into other activities, like determining impacts to training and communication. So this first set of triangles here is about showing an example where you may have a build solution, where there's a predominant focus on business needs. Or in the second set of triangles, the example is maybe on a COT solution, so a customizable off-the-shelf solution, where there's a predominant focus on the technology. You can see that those triangles take up a large focus and attention, and there's lack of alignment with the other perspectives, whether technical or clinical, and there's a lack of failure to realize benefits. Your ideal scenario is to think about early planning, and when you have enough time, it facilitates focus and alignment of all perspectives, clinical, business, and technical, resulting in the opportunity to realize your desired benefits. So how do we go about aligning these perspectives? Well, it's important to document your project benefits. So these are your goals in specific measurable terms. Ideally, you're not going to boil the ocean and you just have, a couple of them. You want to make sure these are aligned with your strategic goals. It's not very helpful if your organization has corporate goals and objectives that are off in a different direction, totally separate from what your e-health activities may be. And then you want to consider what the specific clinical workflow requirements are in terms of activities, technology, the environment, people, and the organization. So workflow is the who, what, where, when, and how things get done, and it does include both the clinical and administrative focus. So as noted, the workflow provides opportunities to identify what training and education needs are. And so the network was really adamant about defining training and education as two separate activities. This framework element, though, is about the act of imparting knowledge and specific skills among key stakeholders to successfully use new technology and promote adoption. So I mentioned that we see them as separate activities. It's because they feed into one another, but an education plan considers the approaches to prepare an organization and its users for the upcoming change. It forms the foundation upon which solution training will occur. It continues over the longer term. It ensures sustainable and optimal use. And without execution of a comprehensive education or training plan, few, if any, of your project goals can be achieved. When implementing new health systems, e-health systems, approaches to user education, training, knowledge development, and capacity have to be specific, practical, and offered on the job in a timely fashion. So education and training are sometimes just simply described as the difference between knowing and doing. So while educational initiatives begin early in a project and are tightly linked with communications messaging, training activities are often most successful in terms of improving retention of knowledge and skill when they're offered as just-in-time delivery. So this graphic on the slide here just shows that if you are a leader and you're thinking about education, you'd want to be asking yourself, are you educating the team so that they're aware of the reasons for change? Whereas a leader who's responsible for training needs to be asking themselves, are we getting the staff up to speed so they can hit the ground running? Similarly, from a recipient perspective, from an educational focus, what are we implementing? What does this mean to me? And from a training perspective, how do I use these transactions to enter data? How do I use it to display my information? How do I get the reports to do my job? So it's very practical and related to the immediate change at hand. Lastly comes monitoring and evaluation. It's certainly last but not least. And monitoring and evaluation sits in the middle of the framework. And you'll note that it's got dotted lines around all of it. And that's important graphically just to represent that we believe every stage of the process and every element of activities is important to be monitoring and evaluating. So it's a process of reviewing whether your change activities took place as they planned, the extent to which they're effective, identifying opportunities for you to improve them. It takes place throughout the project lifecycle, and it supports the ongoing rollout and solution integration. It provides opportunities for you to assess project risks, identify issues, and develop mitigation plans. And it includes both formative and summative evaluation. So formative is more process type evaluation. It could be, how many training sessions did we offer? How successful were they? How satisfied were staff? How prepared were they? How many media impressions did we have from our communications activities? What type of communications did we use? It could be very concrete, qualitative or quantitative components like that. But it's also important to be thinking about summative evaluation. So what are the net outcomes and impacts from your project? And are you achieving the benefits that you set out to achieve? And if you identify gaps between where you're at and where you want it to be, it provides you with an opportunity to look back at your change plan and see how you can adapt it going forward so that you can be on target to achieve those objectives. These 7 steps here under summative evaluation come to us from the Newfoundland and Labrador Centre for Health Information. And they just make good common sense how you would undertake such an evaluation. Identify key stakeholders, orient them to the rationale for why evaluation is needed, agree on when to evaluate, agree on what to evaluate, how to evaluate, analyze and report, agree on your recommendations, and make sure they're forwarded to the key stakeholders so that they can be addressed. So now that we've clarified the importance of the National Change Management Framework and what those core elements mean, I want to speak to you quickly about how you would embed change management into regular practice. So we talked about a big focus in our life on project management, the scope, budget, and time. And so this next section here will hopefully give you some ideas on how to embrace change management as a philosophy that matches up nicely within project management. So with any kind of change here, and this slide comes to us again from ProSci, project management is about moving things forward and implementing a change. You're moving from your current state through some period of transition into the future. Change management is also about that, but it really focuses on the people and all the rest of it that needs to change along with the solution integration. When you can match these two views up together, you end up with success. They can be complementary disciplines because there's a common objective. So some of the tools you may be familiar with from the project management world is, what are the work breakdown structures? What are the Gantt charts? What's the budget? Issue and risk logs, status updates, stage gates, milestones, checkpoints, those kinds of things. In the change management world, we focus on relationships. We do organizational or people readiness assessments, workflow analysis. We map out our stakeholders or our sponsors. We talk about coaching, communication, training. We identify issues, and we suggest course correction. But how do they work together? Well, they both define project objectives, and there's common goals and metrics for success. On the communication, there's reporting relationships, roles and activities, responsibilities and deliverables, and both perspectives need to be considered in creating these outputs. But crystallizing and documenting PM versus change management roles, well, here's some examples. Project managers or management shares information for communication, while the change manager would be one to create the communication deliverable. A project manager may determine the training schedule, but the change manager determines the training approach. Project manager informs sponsors, and the change manager coaches sponsors. So there are definitely synergistic activities that help you to achieve a common goal. So as you move forward in implementing your solution or your transformational change, I'd challenge you to think about yourself as the change leader. Like all these little fish in the small bowl, the one sees that there's a bigger bowl that's available, and is going to try and get there. So how are you going to be the change leader in your organization? How are you going to influence those around you to take on a change? And how are you going to influence those above you to become a leader and a sponsor for your change initiative? I wanted to also let you know about some of the available change management resources that are available to you to help you support your role as you jump into the next fishbowl. I mentioned the framework and toolkit for managing e-health change. So we do have hard copies of that. You can get in touch if you would prefer to have a hard copy, but they are available in a downloadable PDF and a flipbook. We have an online toolkit repository as well, and this is a sample of tools that are provided from the Change Management Guide, plus many more tools that come to us from across the jurisdictions and from other sectors of and healthcare organizations internationally. And they're all downloadable for you to use and link to and tweak to suit your needs and hopefully just help you get started. We also have a new organization discussion group on LinkedIn. You're welcome to join us and ask questions there and reach out to some of your colleagues. And then the last couple of slides I'll just leave as reference for you since you'll have a copy of these available to you. It just shows you how to get into the forum to access the information about the Pan-Canadian Network and its working groups, what they're meeting about, what their ongoing objectives are, and more importantly, this is where the change management toolkit sits with those tools I was just speaking about. Just quickly then, from Infoway's webpage, you would log in with your Infoway passport, which is free to get. You would then click on to the forum button. Then you would click onto the change management forum link, and from there you come to the landing page. Where the tools are located is under the fifth folder there, Framework and Toolkit for Managing eHealth Change, Resources, and Tools. And within that, there's parent folders that are aligned to the 6 core elements of the framework. Information is organized by titled folders. And within each one, there's subfolders, tools and resources, or further reading. So you can get the practical approaches, or you can get more of the background information. The next slide just shows an example of how it's laid out within the stakeholder engagement element. We try to maintain these folders and information at least on a quarterly basis, or as new information becomes available. And if you have anything that you'd like to share, we encourage you to submit your own tools and resources for sharing with this group, because certainly collaboration is essential. So within this presentation today, we talked a little bit about what is change, why is it hard, what is change management. We focused on the National Change Management Framework. We talked about how to embed change into regular practice and identified some available resources that are there for you to use to help you get going with your plans. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Cassie. We really appreciate your thoughts on change management. For anyone interested in more of our talks, they are available on this channel or at imaginationchallenge.ca. Registration in the Imagination Outcomes Challenge runs until March 2013, so if you are currently using one or more of the solutions listed here, I encourage you to register and reap the large benefits of participating. More details are available on the website, and thank you for watching.